The acrid smell of burning plastic was the first sign, cutting through the usual hospital miasma of antiseptic and stale coffee. Then came the distant, almost polite shriek of the fire alarm from the West Wing, escalating quickly to a deafening, insistent bellow that ripped through St. Jude's General Hospital like a panicked scream. Chaos erupted, not a frenzied, screaming chaos, but a suffocating, disoriented shuffle of patients and staff. Maya Rodriguez, RN, was on the geriatric ward, her shift dissolving into a blur of frantic directives. "Move them! Get them to the stairwells! Stay calm!" Her voice, usually soothing, was now sharp, cutting through the rising tide of fear. She helped Mrs. Lycottard, the rising tide of fear. Chen, frail and confused, into a waiting gurney, guiding the orderly with quick, precise instructions. Her eyes, usually warm and empathetic, darted, calculating risks, assessing needs, her mind a whirlwind of protocols and priorities. Patients first. Always patients first. The fire alarm blared, a relentless siren drowning out the crackle that was now distinctly audible, closer than it should be. Smoke, thin and wispy at first, began to curl from under the doors of the West Wing corridor, a malevolent gray tendril seeking purchase in the air. Maya felt the prickle of adrenaline, the cold, sharp focus that came with true emergencies. This wasn't a drill, this was real. She was helping secure the final gurney when a junior nurse, barely out of nursing school, her face ashen and eyes wide with terror, grabbed her arm. "Maya, the West Wing. Mr. Henderson. No one went back for him. He's in 412. His oxygen tank." Maya froze. Mr. Henderson. 87 years old, a retired literature professor, gentle and sharp-witted, but frail. Confined to his bed, relying on a continuous oxygen supply for his failing lungs. Room 412 was at the very end of the west corridor, deep in the plume of smoke that was now thickening, turning the once bright hallway into a murky, suffocating tunnel. Protocol was clear. Once an area was evacuated, it was sealed. No one went back in. Not for anything. Firefighters, the trained professionals, would handle it. But the firefighters hadn't arrived yet. Not to the fourth floor, not to the West Wing. The building was old, sprawling, and fire crews were likely battling the source of the blaze elsewhere, or navigating the labyrinthine corridors. Minutes. Precious, life-or-death minutes. Mr. Henderson couldn't move. He couldn't even call for help effectively, his voice a reedy whisper at the best of times. Alone. Trapped. With an oxygen tank that, in the wrong conditions, could become a bomb. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding in the span of a single heartbeat. Liability, policy, safety, risk, duty, life. The last word screamed louder than all the others. Life. "Stay here," Maya ordered the junior nurse, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Keep everyone moving towards the east stairwell. Do not go back inside." Without another word, without a moment's hesitation, Maya grabbed a stack of clean towels from a nearby cart. She shoved them under a running faucet in an empty room, saturating them with cold water. Tossing one over her head, letting the cool, damp fabric cling to her hair and forehead, she held another tightly against her mouth and nose. Then, bracing herself, she plunged into the roiling gray-black smoke that now choked the west corridor. The heat hit her first, a physical blow, heavy and oppressive, making her skin prickle and her lungs tighten. The smoke was thicker than she'd anticipated, an angry, blinding wall that stung her eyes and clawed at her throat. She bent low, remembering her training, trying to find the cleaner air near the floor, but even there, the air was hot and laced with the metallic tang of burning insulation. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that made the familiar hallway terrifyingly alien. "Mr. Henderson!" she yelled, her voice muffled by the wet cloth, but the roar of the fire and the insistent alarm swallowed her words. She pressed on, one hand against the wall, guiding herself, counting doors. 407, 408, 409. The heat intensified with every step. She could hear the crackling now, closer, more aggressive, like a hungry beast devouring the building. A faint popping sound, like distant firecrackers, suggested electrical conduits were failing. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum. What if she couldn't find him? What if she collapsed? But she pushed the fear down, deep, deep inside, replacing it with a fierce, burning determination. "He's waiting. He's counting on me." Finally, room 412. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness in the smoke-filled hallway. She pushed it open, coughing violently as a fresh wave of smoke billowed out. Inside, the room was a nightmare of shadows and choking air. The overhead lights were out, plunging everything into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the angry orange glow seeping in from the hallway and the faint, flickering light of a distant fire. "Mr. Henderson!" she gasped, moving quickly to the bed. He was there, slumped against his pillows, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, struggling for breath, the thin cannula delivering oxygen to his nostrils. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Maya?" he whispered, his voice thin, barely audible. "Is that you?" Relief, sharp and overwhelming, flooded her. He was alive. She didn't waste a second. Her nursing instincts took over, honed by years of quick thinking in critical situations. First, the oxygen. The tank was still connected, hissing softly. A potential explosion. She moved with practiced speed, her fingers flying over the valves, disconnecting the cannula, then turning off the main supply, listening for the reassuring hiss to die down. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to listen to me," she said, her voice urgent but steady. "We're getting out. I'm going to carry you." He was a frail man, but surprisingly heavy with the dead weight of fear and immobility. Maya, though of average build, was strong from years of lifting and moving patience. She positioned herself, wrapping one arm under his knees, the other around his back, pulling him gently but firmly from the bed. She shifted him into a firefighter's carry, a technique she'd learned years ago during a mandatory hospital safety drill she'd half-jokingly thought she'd never use. His arm went around her neck, surprisingly light. He was coughing harder now, his body trembling. "Hold on, Mr. Henderson," she gritted through clenched teeth, her muscles screaming in protest, the heat radiating off the walls a living thing. "Almost there? Oh." Every step back down the hallway was an eternity. The smoke seemed to have thickened even further, visibility dropping to mere inches. She stumbled once, her foot catching on something unseen. But she recovered, her grip on Mr. Henderson like iron. Her lungs burned, her eyes streamed, and the wet cloth over her face felt less like a shield and more like a suffocating shroud. The roar of the fire was closer now, a hungry, crackling symphony of destruction. Just as she reached the threshold of the west wing, the point where the smoke began to thin slightly, where the first glimpse of unsmoked hallway offered a sliver of hope, a deafening crash echoed behind her. A section of the ceiling, heavy with plaster and insulation, had given way, sending a shower of sparks and debris exactly where she had been standing moments before. A violent updraft of smoke and heat followed, pushing her forward, almost knocking her off her feet. She stumbled out, gasping, collapsing to her knees in the relatively clearer air of the main corridor. Firefighters, their faces grim and determined behind their masks, were finally swarming the hallway, pulling hoses, shouting orders. They paid her no mind, focused on the inferno she had just escaped. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, was conscious, though struggling for air. He looked up at her, his eyes full of a profound gratitude that needed no words. He managed a weak, "Thank you, Maya, my girl," before paramedics, who had rushed to their side, gently took him from her arms. Maya remained on her knees, coughing, the taste of ash and fear thick in her mouth. Her body ached, her lungs burned, and her hair was singed in places. But Mr. Henderson was safe. For a fleeting, precious moment, as her colleagues looked at her with a mixture of horror and awe, she felt it, the pure, uncomplicated relief of a life saved. She was a hero. She had done her job. She had done what was right. The feeling of being a hero was a fleeting warmth, quickly extinguished by the cold reality that followed. Maya was whisked away to the emergency room, not as a grateful recipient of care, but as a mandatory subject of examination. A surly ER doctor, his face impassive, checked her for smoke inhalation. He listened to her lungs with a stethoscope that felt like a block of ice against her soot-stained skin, ran a few cursory tests. "You're lucky," he stated, not congratulations in his voice, but a clipped, professional observation. Mild smoke inhalation. Oxygen for a few hours. Nothing major, this time. He fixed her with a hard stare, his eyes devoid of empathy. "You violated every safety protocol we have, Nurse Rodriguez. Do you understand the liability you put this hospital under?" Maya's initial wave of relief evaporated, replaced by a growing knot of confusion and resentment. "I saved a patient, doctor. He would have died in there." The doctor merely shrugged, turning to write on her chart. "A patient whose death would have been an unavoidable tragedy covered by the hospital's robust insurance and safety procedures." Your actions, however, create a very different kind of problem, a preventable one. He walked away, leaving her with the bitter taste of his words. The narrative was already being shaped, reckless, not heroic. The sting intensified when the fire chief, a stern-faced man named Chief Miller, approached her in the hallway a few hours later, after she'd been discharged from the ER. He spoke in hushed, formal tones, but his words carried the weight of an official reprimand. "Nurse Rodriguez," he began, his expression unreadable. "What you did in there? It was an act of extreme bravery. Undeniable. No one can dispute that." Maya felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps someone understood. Then the hammer fell. However, it was also an extreme breach of protocol, a dangerous, unnecessary risk. You could have gotten yourself killed, forced my team to divert critical resources from fighting the fire to rescuing you. Do you understand the implications of that? He stood before her, not just as a fire chief, but as an embodiment of rigid, unyielding authority. Her supervisor, Brenda, a woman who had always been kind, stood beside him, her face tight with worry and a hint of fear. She wouldn't meet Maya's eyes. The message was clear. No matter the outcome, the act itself was unforgivable. "He was going to die, Chief," Maya pleaded, her voice cracking. "He was alone, on oxygen, and he couldn't move." Chief Miller sighed, a sound of weary frustration. "I appreciate your compassion, nurse. But we have procedures for a reason. To protect everyone, including you." He nodded curtly, then turned and walked away with Brenda trailing behind him, casting a mournful, apologetic glance back at Maya. The gratitude she had felt from Mr. Probser, Henderson seemed a distant dream. The next morning, still feeling the lingering effects of smoke in her lungs and a profound sense of injustice in her soul, Maya received a formal summons. She was to report to the office of Mr. Plant Davies, the hospital administrator, at 10 a.m. The envelope was thick, official, impersonal. Her stomach churned. This was it, the official reckoning. Mr. Davies' office was a sterile expanse of polished mahogany and glass, overlooking the city skyline. It was a world away from the chaotic, often messy, reality of patient care. He was a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, with slicked-back gray hair and eyes that held the cold, calculating glint of a ledger sheet. He didn't offer her a seat. He didn't offer her a greeting. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk, then settled into his own, hands steepled under his chin. "Nurse Rodriguez," he began, his voice calm, infuriatingly detached, like a news anchor reporting a distant tragedy. "We need to discuss your actions during the fire yesterday." Maya felt a surge of defensiveness. "I saved Mr. Henderson, sir. He would have died if I had waited for the fire department." Davies didn't react, his expression unchanging. "We understand the circumstances, Nurse Rodriguez. And while your intentions may have been commendable, your actions constitute a severe breach of hospital policy, a flagrant disregard for established safety protocols, and an unacceptable exposure of this institution to immense legal and financial risk." He spoke in corporate jargon, each word a cold, hard pebble striking her. Exposure to risk, not patient safety, not human life. "He's an 87-year-old man, Mr. Davies," Maya pressed, trying to inject humanity into the stark, sterile air. "He was helpless. What was I supposed to do? Let him burn?" Davies finally met her gaze, his eyes sharp and unyielding. "You were supposed to follow protocol, Nurse Rodriguez. The very protocols you signed to uphold when you accepted employment here. The hospital has procedures in place for such emergencies. When a ward is deemed unsafe, staff are to evacuate, period. Any patient remaining behind becomes a matter for the fire department. While regrettable, such a loss would be an act of God, covered by our comprehensive insurance policies and absolved by our adherence to safety guidelines. Your actions, however, create a very different scenario. One of negligence, reckless endangerment, and a complete disregard for the safety of yourself and, by extension, other personnel who might have been forced to intervene to rescue you." His words, delivered with such calm, logical precision, felt like a slap to the face. He was turning her act of selfless heroism into a selfish act of recklessness. He was saying a dead patient, officially, was preferable to a living one saved by unofficial means. "So you're saying it would have been better if he died?" Maya asked, her voice trembling with disbelief and barely contained anger. Davies leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, but losing none of its chilling detachment. "I'm saying that the hospital's priority, first and foremost, is the safety of its staff and the maintenance of its operational integrity. Your actions endangered both. We cannot and will not condone such behavior. Effective immediately, Nurse Rodriguez, you are being placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into your conduct. Your access badge will be deactivated and your pay suspended until further notice. We will be in touch. He made a dismissive gesture, indicating their conversation was over. Maya stood there, reeling, the polished floor feeling unstable beneath her feet. Administrative leave, suspended pay, an investigation, for saving a life. She stumbled out of his office, the grand, imposing building suddenly feeling like a prison. The smiles and nods of other staff members felt like accusations. She was no longer the hero. She was the problem. The heretic, the one who dared to defy the rules in the name of a human being. The cold, impersonal logic of the institution was already closing in, ready to crush her. The days that followed were a descent into a bureaucratic purgatory. Maya's phone, once buzzing with calls from concerned colleagues and even a few media inquiries that she politely declined, fell silent. The initial flurry of local news stories, which had briefly hailed her as a hero nurse, quickly shifted their tone. Subtle, carefully worded phrases, clearly seeded by the hospital's PR machine, began to appear. Controversial actions, questions over protocol, investigation underway into nurses' conduct during fire. Her name, once associated with bravery, was now whispered in conjunction with reckless and irresponsible. The investigation was a farce, a meticulously orchestrated performance designed not to uncover truth, but to justify a predetermined outcome. She was summoned to a series of meetings, each one more soul-crushing than the last. The HR panel consisted of 3 individuals: a stern-faced woman who introduced herself as the head of employee relations, a mild-mannered man from legal, and a younger woman who took meticulous notes but never spoke. They sat across a long, sterile table, their expressions unyielding. Miss Rodriguez, the head of HR, began, her voice devoid of inflection. Let's review the hospital's fire safety protocols, shall we? Section 4, subsection B. In the event of a fire, all staff are to prioritize the safe evacuation of patients to designated safe zones. Under no circumstances should staff re-enter a compromised area after initial evacuation, except under direct order from the fire department incident commander. Do you recall signing this document upon your employment? Oh? Yes, I recall, Maya said, her voice tight. But Mr. Henderson was still in there. He would have died. Whether Mr. Henderson was in the ward or not is irrelevant to the protocol, Miss Rodriguez, the lawyer interjected, his voice soft but firm. The protocol dictates your actions, not the circumstances. Did you follow the protocol? No, she admitted, feeling the trap closing. I followed my conscience. I saved a life. And by doing so, Miss Prizer, Rodriguez, the HR head continued, picking up the thread, you knowingly endangered yourself, potentially diverting critical rescue resources from the fire, and exposed the hospital to significant liability. Did you consider how your actions would affect the hospital's insurance rating? The potential for a wrongful death lawsuit had you been injured or killed during your unauthorized action? The questions were not about saving a life. They were about protecting an institution. They twisted her compassionate act into a selfish, dangerous stunt. They asked if she felt she was above the rules, if she had a hero complex, if she was seeking attention. Each session left her feeling physically drained and emotionally violated. Her colleagues, her supposed comrades in the trenches of healthcare, largely abandoned her. A memo had circulated, reminding staff of their obligations to adhere to all hospital policies and to refrain from discussing ongoing internal investigations with external parties or the media. The message was clear: stay silent or face the consequences. Most did. Some, out of genuine fear for their own jobs, actively avoided her in the rare instances she was allowed on campus to retrieve personal items. A few, like Nurse David, managed to slip her a quick, supportive text. Hang in there, Maya. We know what you did was right. But none dared to speak up publicly. She felt completely isolated, a pariah in the very place she had dedicated her life to. The financial pressure was immense. Her pay had been suspended, and the hospital was notoriously slow in processing final payments or benefits for employees on administrative leave. Her modest savings, carefully hoarded to put her younger brother, Leo, through community college, dwindled rapidly. Leo was in his first semester, and the tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. He was counting on her, believing in her, completely unaware of the Kafkaesque nightmare she was living. She couldn't bring herself to tell him. He looked up to her. She was his rock after their parents passed. To burden him with her troubles felt like a betrayal. She spent her days staring at bills on her kitchen table, the numbers mocking her. Rent, utilities, food, Leo's tuition. The stress manifested physically. She couldn't sleep, her appetite vanished, and a dull, constant ache settled in her shoulders and neck. She called the nursing union, but they were slow-moving, bogged down in bureaucracy. "We'll look into it, Maya, but these things take time, and technically, you did violate policy." Their words, though less overtly hostile than Davies, still echoed the same disheartening sentiment. The system was designed to protect itself, not its people. One bleak afternoon, a thick letter with the St. Jude's logo arrived. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was official, her termination. Not for saving a life, but for gross negligence, insubordination, and endangerment of hospital staff and property. She read the words over and over, each one a hammer blow. Gross negligence. Insubordination. The very words felt like a violation of her character, a deliberate twisting of the truth. Rage, cold and hard, settled deep in her gut. They weren't just firing her, they were trying to destroy her reputation, to make an example of her. She stared out her window at the city, the bustling life below seeming utterly indifferent to her personal catastrophe. Her career, her financial stability, her identity as a healer, all of it crumbling into dust because she had dared to care more about a human life than about a corporate policy. The anger boiled, a bitter, righteous fury that tasted of betrayal and injustice. She had done the right thing, and for that she was being utterly, systematically destroyed. Miles away, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city's glittering skyline, Julian Croft sat bathed in the glow of multiple high-definition screens. The space was a testament to minimalist luxury and cutting-edge technology. Sleek, dark surfaces, ergonomic chairs, and panoramic windows that offered an uninterrupted view of the urban sprawl. Croft, a self-made tech billionaire in his late 30s, was not a man given to grand gestures or emotional displays. He was a creature of logic, algorithms, and data. His company, Synapse, had revolutionized AI in healthcare diagnostics, making him one of the youngest and most influential figures in the tech world. He was scrolling through a curated feed of news, filtering out the noise, searching for threads of genuine human interest, when a small, local news article caught his eye. It was an update on the St. Jude's fire, buried beneath national headlines. The headline read, "Elderly patient, Mr. Arthur Henderson, recovering well after hospital fire." Mr. Henderson. The name resonated deep within Julian. Arthur Henderson had been his English literature professor at the local university, a kind, eccentric, brilliant man who had seen something in a quiet, socially awkward computer science student that no one else had. Professor Henderson had taught him not just about literature, but about the human condition, about empathy, about the subtle nuances of communication that Julian, then, found so baffling. He had been a mentor, a guiding light who had, in his own way, helped Julian connect with the messy, illogical, beautiful parts of humanity he so often overlooked. Julian clicked the article. It mentioned a controversial nurse who had saved Professor Henderson, but quickly glossed over her actions, redirecting to hospital statements about their swift and effective evacuation protocols. The hospital's PR spin was obvious, even to Julian's logical mind. He frowned. Something felt off. Professor Henderson was a man of integrity. If he'd been saved by someone, he'd want that person recognized, not obscured. He picked up his phone, a custom-built device, and dialed. "Get me a direct line to St. Jude's General Hospital. I want to speak to Professor Arthur Henderson's attending physician, immediately." Less than an hour later, Julian Croft, clad in an impeccably tailored, unassuming dark suit, strode into the hushed, antiseptic corridors of St. Jude's. He bypassed the main reception, his assistant having already cleared his path with the surgical precision of a well-oiled machine. He was met not by a nurse, but by Mr. Pleisen, Davies himself, who practically materialized out of thin air, a wide, practiced smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Croft, what an unexpected pleasure. We're honored to have you visit St. Jude's," Davies gushed, extending a hand. He had clearly done his research. A potential tech billionaire donor was a prize. Julian merely nodded, his handshake firm but brief. "I'm here to see Professor Arthur Henderson. He was a mentor of mine. I understand he was involved in the recent fire." His voice was calm, almost flat, betraying no emotion, yet it commanded immediate attention. Davy's smile wavered slightly. "Ah, yes, Mr. Henderson. A remarkable recovery. We're very proud of our staff's swift action during the emergency." He began to guide Julian towards a bank of elevators, subtly trying to steer the conversation towards the hospital's recent expansion plans. Julian stopped, his gaze direct, cutting through Davy's practiced charm. "I understand a nurse was instrumental in his rescue. The articles were vague. Can you tell me more about her?" Davy's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah, yes. Nurse Rodriguez. A complicated situation, Mr. Croft. While her intentions may have been well-meaning, her actions were unfortunately a severe breach of protocol. She put herself, and potentially others, at risk. We have a very strict safety policy here at St. Jude's, designed to protect everyone. Regrettably, due to her insubordination and disregard for established procedures, we were forced to terminate her employment." He recited the hospital's official line, smooth and practiced, a clear attempt to downplay the incident and paint Maya in the worst possible light. Julian listened, his expression unchanged. He was not fooled. The narrative was too neat, too corporate. He knew Professor Henderson would never describe a true hero's actions with such dismissive, sterile language. He merely nodded, feigning acceptance of Davy's explanation. "I see." Davies, mistaking Julian's silence for agreement, brightened. "Perhaps, Mr. Croft, while you're here, you'd be interested in a tour of our new oncology wing. We're always looking for philanthropic partners who share our vision for—" "Thank you, Mr. Davies," Julian interrupted smoothly, his eyes already scanning the hallway for the correct room number. "But I'm simply here to see my old professor." He found Mr. Henderson in a sunlit private room, looking frail but remarkably resilient, surrounded by flowers. The old professor's eyes lit up when he saw Julian. "Julian, my boy! What a surprise!" They spoke for a long time, reminiscing, catching up. Then, gently, Julian guided the conversation towards the fire. Professor Henderson's eyes clouded with emotion as he recounted the horror of being trapped, the smell of smoke, the certainty of death. "And then," he said, his voice stronger now, full of conviction, "my angel appeared. Nurse Rodriguez. She came back for me. When no one else would. She carried me out, Julian. A true hero. They're treating her abominably, you know. Fired her, they did, for saving an old man's life. Can you believe it?" Julian listened, his gaze fixed on Professor Henderson's earnest face. The story was so different from Davy's sanitized version. It confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't about protocol. It was about power, about crushing individuality, about protecting corporate image over human decency. "Do you know where she lives, Professor?" Julian asked, his voice low. Mr. Henderson frowned. "I believe her address is in my medical file, from when she filled out my discharge papers once." "Why, Julian?" "I just want to thank her," Julian said, a subtle shift in his eyes, a glint of steel that was rarely seen. "Properly." He left St. Jude's shortly after, refusing Davies's renewed attempts at a tour, his face cold and determined. He might be a man of logic, but Professor Henderson had taught him the value of human stories, of fighting for what was right. And Maya Rodriguez's story, as he was now understanding it, was a story of profound injustice. Later that afternoon, Maya, slumped on her worn sofa, staring at the termination letter, heard a hesitant knock at her door. She rarely got visitors anymore. Cautiously, she opened it a crack, expecting a bill collector or a reporter. Instead, a man stood there, tall, impeccably dressed, with an intensity in his gaze that was unnerving. He looked out of place in her modest apartment building. "Nurse Rodriguez?" he asked, his voice even calm. "Yes," she replied, her guard immediately up. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, and for a split second, Maya didn't recognize the name. Then, it clicked. The tech billionaire. What could he possibly want? "Mr. Henderson was my professor," he continued, cutting through her surprise. "He taught me that the most logical choice isn't always the right one, but the most human one often is. He told me what you did, and he told me how the hospital has treated you. I'd like to hear your side of the story, if you're willing to tell it." For the first time in weeks, someone was looking at her without judgment, without suspicion, without the cold corporate dismissal that had become her constant companion. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hesitantly, she opened the door wider, letting the billionaire into her world, ready to finally tell her truth. Maya sat across from Julian Croft in her small, cluttered living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across her face. She started slowly, hesitantly, recounting the events of the fire, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger, hurt, and lingering disbelief. As she spoke, the story spilled out. The chief's reprimand, the ER doctor's cold dismissal, Davy's chilling pronouncements, the sham investigation, the isolation, the financial strain, the devastating termination letter. Julian listened, completely still, his eyes never leaving her face, absorbing every detail, every nuance of her pain. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened, a silent, unwavering presence. When she finished, the room was quiet. Maya felt utterly exposed, but also, strangely, a sense of catharsis. Julian finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Thank you for your honesty, Miss Rodriguez. What you've described is an egregious abuse of power and a profound injustice. They didn't just fire you, they attempted to silence and discredit you. That is unacceptable." He stood up, walking to the window, his back to her. "I believe in data, Ms. Rodriguez. And the data here is clear. You acted heroically, and they are punishing you for it. That violates my sense of logical integrity, and frankly, my sense of human decency." He turned back to her, a glint of steel in his eyes. "I'm not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not a sentimental man. But I know a broken system when I see one, and St. Jude's in this instance is broken. I want to help you fix it." Maya looked at him, bewildered. How could you possibly help? They're a huge corporation. They have endless resources." Julian's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "So do I. And unlike St. Jude's, my resources aren't tied up in protecting a flawed image. They're dedicated to truth and efficiency. First step, we get you the best legal representation money can buy." The next morning, Maya found herself in a sleek, modern law office, sitting opposite Sarah Chen, a formidable employment lawyer known for taking on and winning high-profile cases against corporate giants. Ms. Chen, a no-nonsense woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, listened intently as Maya recounted her story again, this time with Julian Croft sitting quietly beside her. "This is a clear-cut case of wrongful termination, Nurse Rodriguez," Ms. Chen stated once Maya finished, "and a textbook example of an institution attempting to scapegoat an individual to protect its bottom line and public image. With Mr. Croft's backing, we will not only sue them for wrongful termination, but we will seek damages for emotional distress, reputational harm, and punitive damages for their malicious conduct. They want to make an example of you? We'll make an example of them." A fire, long dormant, began to rekindle within Maya. The rage that had festered turned into a burning resolve. She wasn't alone anymore. The legal battle began, swift and aggressive. Ms. Chen filed the lawsuit, which immediately garnered attention. But Julian Croft wasn't content to wait for the slow grind of the legal system. He understood the power of public opinion, especially in the digital age. Through his extensive network, his team discreetly leaked key documents to a major national news outlet. The hospital's internal memos coaching staff to avoid discussing Maya's case, transcripts from her sham HR investigation, highlighting the biased questioning, and most damningly, the security camera footage from the hallway. The footage, grainy but undeniable, showed Maya running towards the burning ward, a small, determined figure against a backdrop of smoke and collapsing debris, then emerging, carrying Mr. Henderson just moments before the ceiling gave way. The story exploded. The national news outlet ran an investigative piece that juxtaposed the hospital's cold corporate statements with the raw, heroic footage. The headline blared, "St. Jude's fires hero nurse for saving a life, bureaucracy over humanity." Social media, initially fed by local whispers, erupted. Stand With Maya began to trend, picking up steam at an astonishing rate. Public outrage was immediate and fierce. People called for Davy's resignation, for boycotts of St. Jude's. Maya, once the controversial nurse, was now unequivocally the St. Jude's angel. Letters of support flooded in, job offers from other hospitals, some even out of state, and donations poured into a GoFundMe campaign someone had set up on her behalf, immediately solving her financial woes and allowing her to pay Leo's tuition with a sense of immense relief. The isolation shattered. She was no longer a pariah, she was a symbol. The turning point came during a mandated deposition meeting. It was held in a neutral, upscale conference room, Maya, Julian, and Miss Chen, facing off against a visibly rattled Mr. Point, Davies and his high-powered, but now clearly on the defensive, legal team. Davies, attempting to regain his footing, began with his usual condescending, bureaucratic talk, attempting to portray Maya's actions as an unfortunate but necessary disciplinary measure to uphold safety standards. Miss Chen, however, was a force of nature. She systematically dismantled his arguments, presenting an ironclad case. She presented expert testimony about the speed of oxygen-fed fires, the unlikelihood of the fire department reaching Mr. Henderson in time, and the ethical imperative of a nurse's duty to care. Then Julian Croft spoke, his voice calm, cutting through the legal jargon like a laser. "Mr. Davies," he began, his eyes fixed on the administrator, "let's discuss the fire itself. My team funded an independent engineering report. It found significant deficiencies in St. Tué, Jude's aging fire suppression systems, particularly in the West Wing, which contributed directly to the rapid spread of the fire. Deficiencies that your annual safety audits, which I also have here, apparently failed to flag or address for the past 3 years." He laid out a binder thick with technical documents and blueprints. Davies' face, already pale, went ashen. His lawyers, who had clearly been unaware of this, began whispering frantically. Croft wasn't just defending Maya. He was going for the jugular of the entire institution, exposing its own negligence. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand. He presented facts, cold and irrefutable, painting St. Jude's as a negligent organization more concerned with cutting corners and public image than with actual safety. "So, Mr. Davies," Julian continued, his voice still low but now carrying an undeniable edge of triumph, "it seems that Nurse Rodriguez's protocol breach was, in fact, the only thing that prevented a wrongful death lawsuit against a hospital whose own systemic failures put an elderly patient in mortal danger. Her action, which you condemned, was the only true act of responsibility in that entire incident. It seems, sir, that you fired the very person who prevented a far greater liability for St. Jude's." Davies stammered, his polished facade finally crumbling. He had no answer. His lawyers knew they were defeated. The hospital's carefully constructed narrative had been utterly, irrevocably destroyed. The tide had turned. And Maya, watching the man who had tried to crush her squirm, felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of vindication. The fallout was swift and decisive. St. Jude's General Hospital, facing not only a massive public relations disaster but also overwhelming legal evidence of their own negligence, settled the lawsuit for an astronomical sum. The settlement included substantial damages for Maya, a public apology issued by the hospital's board of directors, and, as a direct consequence of Julian Croft's relentless pressure and the public outcry, the resignation of Mr. Davies. He was replaced by an interim administrator who, in a desperate bid to restore public trust, immediately announced a full, independent audit of all hospital safety protocols and the implementation of a new compassion clause in employee contracts, explicitly protecting staff who acted in good faith to save a life, even if it meant a temporary deviation from strict protocol. Maya sat in Miss Chen's office, signing the final paperwork, the feeling surreal. The past few months had been a whirlwind of emotion, from despair to righteous anger, and now a quiet, profound sense of victory. She was not just vindicated, she was free, financially secure for the first time in her life, with enough to ensure Leo's education for years to come, and a substantial cushion for herself. Julian Croft was there, as always, a silent, supportive presence. After the documents were signed, Ms. Chen shook Maya's hand warmly. "You've set a powerful precedent, Nurse Rodriguez. You fought the system and you won. That's a rare and beautiful thing." Maya thanked Ms. Chen, then turned to Julian. "I don't know how to thank you, Julian. You saved me. You truly did." Julian offered her a small, rare smile. "You saved yourself, Maya. I merely provided the tools. You provided the courage." He paused, then continued, his expression thoughtful. "You'll be looking for a new nursing position now, I imagine?" Maya nodded. "I've had a few offers. Some excellent ones, actually. It's good to know there are still places that value, well, humanity." "Indeed," Julian said, his eyes scanning the cityscape visible through the office window. "But I have a different kind of offer for you. Something more than just a new position." He turned to face her fully. "Money and lawsuits can correct injustices, Maya, but they don't always fix a broken system. They don't change the fundamental philosophy that allows such systems to exist." Maya looked at him intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some research," Julian explained, "into community healthcare, particularly in underserved neighborhoods. There's a defunct clinic not far from here, in the old West End. It closed down years ago, couldn't make a profit. Too many uninsured, too much bureaucracy. He paused, his gaze intense. I've bought it. The building, the equipment, everything. Maya's eyes widened. You bought a clinic? Yes, Julian confirmed. And I want to reopen it. Not as a for-profit institution, but as a genuine non-profit community health center, focused entirely on patient care over profit margins. Accessible, equitable, and staffed by people who truly embody the spirit of care you demonstrated. He stepped closer, his voice earnest. I don't need another hero, Maya. I need a leader. Someone with an unshakable moral compass. Someone who understands what it truly means to put people first, no matter the cost. You've proven you have that courage. That's a quality no amount of money can buy, and no policy can suppress. I want you to run it, as its director. Maya was stunned. The offer was monumental, life-changing. It wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to build something better, a sanctuary of true care, free from the corporate callousness she had endured. It was a chance to embody the very principles she had nearly been destroyed for upholding. Tears pricked her eyes, but these were tears of hope, not despair. She looked at Julian, seeing not just the tech billionaire, but the quiet, determined man who had seen her truth when no one else would. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Julian, I will. 6 months later, the old West End clinic was transformed, renamed the Henderson Community Clinic, in honor of the resilient professor whose life had set this whole improbable chain of events in motion. It buzzed with renewed life. The waiting room, once dreary and dilapidated, was now bright and inviting, filled with the murmur of conversations, the laughter of children, and the soft strains of classical music. Maya, no longer just a nurse but the clinic's director, moved through the bustling corridors with a quiet authority and a radiant confidence. She wore a simple white lab coat, her name badge discreetly pinned, a symbol of her new role. She mentored young nurses, her wisdom forged in the fires of both an actual blaze and bureaucratic injustice. She ensured that every patient, regardless of their ability to pay, received the highest quality of compassionate care. Some of her most supportive former colleagues, tired of the corporate grind at St. Jude's, had joined her, drawn by the promise of a true healing environment. One sunny afternoon, she saw Mr. Henderson himself, now fully recovered and looking years younger, sitting in the waiting room. He wasn't a patient. He was volunteering, reading aloud from a well-loved copy of Wuthering Heights to a small group of captivated children, his gentle voice weaving tales through the clinic's vibrant air. He looked up, caught her eye, and offered a warm, knowing smile. Maya smiled back, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Her heroic act had not just saved one life. It had exposed a fundamental flaw in a broken system and, through a series of unexpected turns, had helped create a new lifeline for an entire community. She had been tested, crushed, and nearly broken, but from the ashes of her ordeal, something truly good and lasting had risen. Her conscience, once her burden, was now her guiding light, illuminating a path of purpose and profound, unwavering care. The rage had turned to fuel, the injustice into inspiration. She was home,